Takes a little bit. Okay, hello everyone. Today we have Andrew Yedlin with us. He's a copywriter and a conversion optimizer that helps SaaS companies and other businesses get more leads and sales through their websites and landing pages. So today he will tell us some proven copywriting techniques on exactly how to do that. Welcome, Andrew. The stage is yours.
All right, thanks a lot. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. Right, we are here today to talk about website copywriting and how to get more leads and bigger sales from your website. Just a little bit about me. So as Lisa just said, I am a conversion copywriter and consultant. I work largely with business-to-business companies, usually software companies, but everything we're going to talk about today applies pretty much equally between business-to-consumer and business-to-business companies. So don't worry too much about that. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started with this first idea, which is that your website is the salesperson who never sleeps. And therefore, it's worth putting a bit of time and effort into making sure that it is the best possible salesperson that it can be. So the way that we're going to tackle that today is in two sections. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the strategy behind improving your website copy. And second, we're going to talk about actually going ahead and writing the copy that is going to make your website a better salesperson. So let's move right on into strategy. So before you write, you want to plan. If you've ever faced a blank Google Doc before, you know how uncomfortable that can be. Things are a lot easier when you have some of your ideas organized and ready to go, so that by the time you sit down to actually write your copy, you have something to work with. You have some raw materials to actually start assembling your copy with. So the first idea under strategy that we want to talk about is giving your website just one job. So your website can do a lot of different things. It can educate prospects, it can impress investors, it can attract business partners or attract job applicants. But what you want to do is you want to assign it one single job. And typically that job is going to be either to generate qualified leads or to make sales. And what that lets you do is it lets you filter all of your decisions through the lens of, does this help my website do its one job better? So just to give you a quick analogy, if you think about the security guard, excuse me, if you think about the security guard at a retail store, I'm sure that their job description comes with a long list of different responsibilities that they have, but ultimately their one job is to prevent theft. And you can measure how well they're doing their job basically by that one metric of how well they are preventing theft. And so you want to treat your website the same way. So again, it can do all of those different things. It can educate people, it can attract people, it can impress people, whatever else websites do. It can do all of those things, but ultimately your website succeeds or fails to the degree that it does its one job. So let's go ahead and move straight into the second idea, which is that you want to focus on what your prospects need to hear rather than what you want to say. So as founders and entrepreneurs, we fall in love with our products and services, and we love talking about them. The problem with that is that your prospects have not yet fallen in love with your products or services. They are preoccupied by their own needs, their own wants, their own issues, and that's really why they're on your website. And so it's your job to stay focused on what your prospects need to hear and to connect that to your product or your service. So the way that you want to do that is you want to stay laser focused on your prospects by focusing on these three things: their pain points, their desired outcomes, and their objections. And of course, there are more beyond that, but you'll get a lot of mileage out of having written down exactly what these things are before you start to write your copy. So before you write a word, you should have written down somewhere in front of you, what are their pain points, what are their desired outcomes, and what are their objections. And I just want to check in real quick. Are we doing well with the streaming? Everything's okay?
Yes, everything's great.
Okay, awesome. So the question then very quickly becomes, how do I actually figure out what those are? And so that leads into this third idea, which is you want to capture your customer's voice. And so the idea here is that the best language to use, the language that is most likely to resonate with your prospects, are the exact words and phrases that they use to describe the things that they need, want, or object to. So the idea here is that in your web copy, you are going to speak their language rather than forcing them to understand yours. And so the best way to do that is to speak to your existing customers and to record and transcribe structured conversations or interviews that you are going to have with them. And we're going to show you how to do that in just a sec. So basically, this is what you want to do. You want to speak to your existing customers. You want to prepare that list of questions that I was just talking about. We're going to go over what those questions are on the next slide. And finally, you want to record and transcribe. Once you have that information, you can start to organize it, and then you'll have everything that you need when it's time to sit down and write. So let's go through the questions that you actually want to ask in these interviews or conversations that you're having with your existing customers. So the way that this is set up is before, during, and after the evaluation period or the decision to actually work with you or buy from you. So before your customer decided to work with you, something drove them to seek a solution like yours. So that's where we're going to start. So if you see on the left column here, before, what drove you to seek a solution like your product? How were you solving that problem before? And what was good or bad about that solution? So this is helping you establish, what does that before picture look like? What exactly is it that triggers someone to go look for a solution like yours? What are those pain points that they're dealing with? What are the desired outcomes that they are after? Then we move into during. So this is when they are considering working with you. You want to ask, did they evaluate other possible solutions? What was good or bad about those? Because once you know that, once you know what they like and don't like about other solutions, then you can position your product or service against that. Next, what was hard about figuring out which solution to use? So this is helping you understand exactly what information prospects are likely to want to see on your website to help them decide which solution to ultimately choose. And that's the next question. Why do you think you ultimately chose your product? And now we're getting more into objections. Was there anything that almost stopped you from buying or signing up or whatever action it was that they took? And then finally, for this part is what, if anything, helped you get over that? So you're trying to uncover the different obstacles that are stopping people from choosing you so that you can address those head on in your web copy. Then after, you want to start to understand what the value is to your customer. So what is it that you can do now that you couldn't do before? And then really trying to follow up on that and draw out as much as you can. So what has that meant for you? Or what has that meant for your business if you're business to business? And a lot of times in these conversations, we'll get sort of surface level answers. You always want to follow up. So when someone just gives you kind of an okay answer or a surface level answer, you can say, okay, and why is that important to you? And you can keep doing that until you start to arrive at the information that you're really after, and you feel like you have a full picture of the value that they are getting. So the tools that I use for this personally, I use video chat software. So I use Zoom. Anything with recording will work. And then I use a service called otter.ai to automatically transcribe those recordings. So I can just hop into otter.ai and actually see a transcript of the entire conversation that I just had And from there, I can start to pick out, okay, here are the pain points. I'm going to start to list the pain points. I'm going to start to list the desired outcomes. And the best part about it is that it's not how you would say it, it's how your customers actually say it. So that is the voice of your customer. And now that you have that information, you can put it on your website and mirror that language back to your customers. To your prospects. And I believe Otter.ai has like a free trial where or not even a free trial, it has a free version, I think, where you get a certain number of minutes of transcription per month. So if you're doing this with maybe 5 customers or something like that, you can probably use that transcription service for free. Okay. So now that we've talked a little bit about strategy, we'll get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty writing stuff. And we do have time for Q&A at the end of all this, so I'm sure you guys will all have a bunch of questions, and we can absolutely go through those. But for now, let's start with talking about writing, principles, and techniques for getting more conversions. So first, we have be clear. Just give me one moment. So a lot of times when people start to write, especially when they're writing copy for a website, they become convinced that they need to be really clever or witty, or they need to put on this writerly voice or something like that. And the reality is that clarity is more important than any of those things. Being clear is much more important than being witty, clever, cute, or whatever it might be. And the reason for that is that confused people do not buy things. If people do not understand exactly what they're getting or exactly what the value is, they will not sign up or they will not buy. So here are just a few tips for being clear. This is obviously, there are entire books on this topic, but this is just a handful of tips that should help you. So the first is to write to one person with a conversational voice. So sometimes you'll see the advice, write the way you speak. I actually don't quite agree with that because I've seen transcripts of the way that I speak, and I don't want to replicate that in my writing. But what I think that advice is pointing to is this idea of using a conversational voice and speaking directly to one person. So that means using words like you or your. That is a great word because everyone is self-interested, and so they want to keep hearing about themselves. Using the word you a lot can be really helpful in terms of engaging your audience, not just in terms of being clear. But again, what you want to do here is you want to use a conversational voice and avoid trying to overly complicate things just because you happen to be writing. You'll see this sometimes when you'll get like a memo or something, and it seems as if the person just decided like, okay, I need to write like a writer, and all of a sudden they start writing in a way that they would never speak. It's just completely unnatural. And we'll see an example of that in just a moment. Next, ask people if they understand your copy. So there's nothing wrong with taking your website and sending it over to some people and saying, hey, would you just tell me if there are any paragraphs or sentences or sections that aren't entirely clear to you? That's at the simplest end of the spectrum if you just want to be really scrappy about it and just get some quick feedback. And the reason that you want to do this is because when you are as close to your product or service as you are, it is impossible to imagine what it's like to not know everything that you know. That's like the curse of knowledge, they call that, right? I have this all the time when I'm writing copy for myself, like on my own website. It's 1,000 times harder than it is when I'm writing for someone else, because it's so hard for me to step outside of myself and understand, okay, sure, this makes sense to me, but does this make sense to my prospect? And so if you want to be scrappy about it, you can just send your copy to people and say, hey, why don't you, please highlight, any sentences that aren't entirely clear to you. If you want to be a little bit more sophisticated about it, there are services out there that are designed for this exact thing. One of them that I've used before is called Wynter, Wynter. And that is a service that is entirely designed around testing your copy. You can, find audiences that are similar to your ideal audience, and you can ask them questions. A lot of them are based around clarity and making sure that people actually understand your message. So let's just take a peek at a couple of examples. So I just pulled this from a website where I found some really not so conversational copy. I'm just gonna really quickly read a sentence or two from it. So I did redact the product name just to not so that I wasn't dogging on them in public. But here it says, product name has a single focus on helping enterprises transform strategy to delivery in today's fast-paced, highly disruptive markets. Our solutions create, okay, so just lost all of you probably. And the reason for that is because it's not written in a conversational tone. I'm having a hard time understanding what this means. There's a lot of jargon. It's not written in a conversational way. Nobody actually speaks this way. And whoever wrote this, seems to have put on their writer hat rather than focusing on just writing a conversation or being conversational and speaking to a single person. So on the other hand, and this is really common, especially in the B2B space, because there's so much jargon that's thrown around, a lot of technical things that have long technical names. But here's an example from B2B that is conversational. So this says, the best way to turn interest into revenue, real-time personalization for every site visitor, day or night. That adds up to shorter deal cycles for you and a better experience for your customers. This is so much better than the copy that we just read. There's a lot more going on here besides just clarity in terms of comparing this to the last example that we saw. But a big part of what happens when you start to write to one person and you start to write more conversationally is that your copy just becomes clearer because it's not muddled by these extra things that you're trying to do because you think you need to do something differently when you're writing from when you're speaking. So here's an example on the left where the company that wrote this headline was trying to do something kind of clever with the idea of we put you first. So I believe there was, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's something around the idea of, like in SEO, putting someone first in the results on a results page, but also the idea that we put you first, as in we put your needs before ours. I'm not exactly sure, but the point is that they went for something that was clever and it didn't work at all. So again, the idea here is not to try to blow your prospects away with how creative and witty you are. The point is to make the value of your product and service crystal clear to them. All right. The next thing we have here is to be valuable. So the way that you are valuable is by connecting your product or service to the pain points and desires that we talked about earlier. So you really want to focus on connecting the dots between your product and those pain points and desired outcomes. So something that you'll see a lot of times in web copy is that they will a company will mention that they have a feature, and they'll just sort of stop there because they assume okay, people understand you have this feature. And therefore the value of that feature is self-evident when it's actually not. So what you want to do in order to help communicate your value are a few things. One thing you want to do, and this is a technique that I use pretty much every day that I'm writing copy, is to ask yourself, so what, after every line or paragraph. And we'll go through an example of this in just a moment. But the point of this is that it is forcing you to communicate the value or to check your copy to make sure that the value is crystal clear, so that you're not stopping short of explaining why something's important and assuming that your prospect is going to connect the dots when they won't. Next is to show the cost of not taking action. So this is really big. A lot of times what you'll see in web copy is people will talk about, here are all the benefits that you're going to get from working with us or from buying our product. What a lot of people miss is showing what will happen if you don't buy the product or if you don't start using the service. And so part of what your job is when you're writing your web copy is to basically show your prospect that they're making a decision between two choices. One is to continue living in this miserable world that they're living in now, this like horrible before state. And their other option is to live in this wonderful world where they do use your solution, and that's the after state. So whether or not that's exactly true, is probably never true. There are probably more than two options. But since we're trying to build a persuasive argument here with your website copy, you kind of want to paint a picture of here's what happens if you use our product, but here's what happens if you don't use it. And it's not about fear mongering or being unethical or anything like that. It's just about helping your prospect see the full picture of this is what happens when you work with us. This is what happens when you don't. So let's start with that first thing we talked about, which was the so what test, or the so what technique. So just a quick readout here. So this says expert services empower your team with the expertise and best practices they need to supercharge and optimize your Drift experience. A lot of writers might stop there and say, okay, the point of the sentence is that it's going to supercharge and optimize your Drift experience. But if you wrote that and you ask yourself, so what, you would find that it's a little bit short of actually conveying the value that needs to be conveyed. So what you see that they did here is they added, so you'll see better results faster. That's what I mean by connecting the dots. So the other thing we talked about was showing the cost of not taking action. So if you look at the second paragraph of, the first paragraph of body copy here, that's what this is doing. So this is for a training service that helps teams get up to speed with a marketing automation tool that is very complex. And basically, we know that prospects are hoping to get this system to deliver predictable leads and revenue. And so what we're doing with this body copy is we're showing them that if they don't do something about making sure that they have the right skills in place, they aren't going to be able to get that outcome that they want. So it would have been really easy to just start with the second paragraph and just have that. So get the training your team needs from beginner to expert so they can make the most of your investment in Marketo. Instead, what we want to do, if we just had that one paragraph, it would be compared to what? So this allows you to create some contrast and again, create that dichotomy of two choices. One is to keep going down the path you're going now. The other choice is to get off of that path and into your desired state. All right, moving along. The next thing you want to do is you want to be credible. So the idea here is that anyone can make claims. The hard part is actually proving those claims. A bold claim by itself proves absolutely nothing. So you need to support your claims with evidence. And one way to sort of think about this is that your website and your web copy are essentially a persuasive argument. And the way that you build a persuasive argument is by making a claim and then proving that claim and repeating it until you've proven your overall argument. So let's talk about a few different ways to be credible and to basically support your claims with proof. So testimonials are super common. I'm going to show you an example and a tip for using testimonials in just a second. Ratings and reviews are really common, and we're going to go through a few examples of a bunch of these. Awards that you've won, case studies, really common in business to business, metrics, and authority. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are a handful of really common things you can use. One thing that's not on here that would be logos from current customers if you're in B2B. So let's talk first about testimonials. So what you see here is some copy that makes a claim. And really, if you look at the body copy here, that's where the claim is, which is convert more website visitors into customers. Then if you look below that section where you see the testimonial, you'll see that there is a third party, so someone from a company other than the company who owns the website, supporting that claim by saying, by engaging visitors on our website with Intercom's Messenger, we've increased our visitor to paid conversion rates by 45%. So rather than just slapping a bunch of testimonials onto their page and saying, look at all the great things that people are saying about us, they've actually contextualized them so that they are now supporting the claims that they are making in their copy. So that's really a powerful way to use testimonials, is to pair them with the claims that they support. Ratings and badges and things like this can be really useful. And in particular, 2 places that you want to use them. One is early on the page to establish credibility, so that when people land on your website, they know that they're not dealing with some random untrustworthy business. You've established a little bit of credibility, so they're willing to see what else you have to say. Another really helpful place to use it is late on the page, around where your calls to action are, because this helps neutralize a little bit of anxiety that people might feel about starting to take an action, by showing basically, other people have gone through this process, and not only did they live to tell the tale, but they came back around and left us nice reviews. Case studies are really powerful. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we have a lot to get through. But basically, having a story about how a person who is similar to your prospect actually got the desired outcomes that your claims are promising. Very powerful way to make your not just prove the claim, but also to be really specific in how you're proving it. Metrics, not a whole lot to add here, other than metrics sometimes are useful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people won't trust you based on your metrics. So they're like anything else in copy. There are no silver bullets or anything like that. But this is another technique that you can use to help support your claims, is to quantify it. And the idea behind that is that, if you say, I'm sure you guys have seen like signs where it's like best pizza in New York. Nobody ever believes that, right? Because even though you're saying it's the best, it's a very general claim. Best according to who? Everyone's going to say that. But if you say, ranked number 1 by TripAdvisor, or whatever it might be, that's a more specific claim, and more specific claims are more believable, because if you're making a specific claim, you're either telling the truth or you're lying. So if I say I have the best pizza in New York, I'm not necessarily lying. I'm just exaggerating or using hyperbole, and people expect that. But if I say our pizza was rated number 1 by TripAdvisor, I'm either telling the truth or I'm lying, and people don't really expect you to flat out lie. They expect you to exaggerate, but they don't expect you to lie. Okay, so this is a good technique for people who are earlier in their businesses and they don't have a lot of testimonials, case studies, metrics, and things like that. Another thing you can do is you can borrow authority. So what I have here is just a little bit of copy from a landing page, but at the bottom of it, you'll see there's a tweet. And so this person is considered an authority figure in my space. And so basically what they're doing is they're using this tweet or really any quote from an authority figure to support the importance of a solution like this. And since there aren't a lot of solutions like this out there, they can kind of get away with that because they don't necessarily need to say that we're the best in the category, because they kind of own the category. They can say this category is important, and that's really what they're using it for. All right, next is be different. So the idea here is that it's not enough to just describe the value of your product. A lot of times, the prospects on your page are comparing a bunch of different solutions, and they are absolutely desperate for information that makes it easier to decide which one they want. So let's do an example here. And obviously, this touches on something much bigger than copywriting. At this point, we're talking really about your positioning as a whole. But what we have here is an example. So there are thousands of SEO agencies out there, and most of them use a retainer model. And so what this agency is doing is they are leading with how they're different, which is that they are not using retainer models. So what they could have done is they could have led with all of the same claims that everyone else is making about how your rankings are going to improve and you're going to get more traffic and more sales and this, that, and the other thing. Instead, they went in a whole different direction and just basically said, here's how we're different. This is where we're planting our flag. And it really makes it easy for people to decide when they're looking at 6 different SEO agencies and 5 of them all have the same claims and one of them doesn't. This one stands out. And the idea here is that sometimes it is better to be different than it is to be better. And the reason for that is because of what we just talked about, where if you're one of many solutions that all have the same claims, how do you really prove that you're better? Even if you are better, that message doesn't necessarily come across because other people are making the same claims as you are. The next idea here is to make it easy. So when people are looking for solutions and products online, they are in that moment impatient, lazy, and skeptical. And it's your job to remove any friction from your website or to keep friction to a minimum so that you don't lose leads or sales because people thought that it was going to be too much work, or they thought that, or they thought that it was higher risk than that somehow working with you, buying from you, was going to put them at risk in some way. So some tips for removing friction. And again, this is like, there's a whole world of information about this, particularly in the world of user experience design, but also in copy. But here are just a few high-level tips for you. So the first one is to limit choices. And you'll see I have on here Hick's law. So this is the idea that the more choices you have, the longer it will take you to make a decision. So if you've ever been trying to like figure out what you're going to watch on Netflix, I don't know if anyone else has had this experience like I've had, where you spend half an hour looking for which 22-minute show you're going to watch. And that's because you have so many choices. And so a big part of what Netflix does is they try to help you narrow your choices by creating categories, tailoring content to you, and saying that based on this thing, you might like that thing. And the whole point there is to keep to help you make choices faster. And so where does this turn up? So let's say you have a bunch of different products or services available. You want to find ways to break that up and limit the number of choices that someone has to make at any given time. We can talk more about that if people have more questions about that in Q&A. But for now, let's move on to the next few. And these next things we are going to go over in more detail, so I'll just run through them quickly right now. So the next thing you want to do is you want to avoid language that implies risk or effort. Again, people are impatient, lazy, and skeptical when they're searching, when they're evaluating different products and solutions. And the bar for what is considered high risk or high effort is extremely low in copy because, again, we're trying to do things quickly. We don't have patience. We don't trust anyone. We're trying to move quickly. The next thing you want to do is you want to write button copy intentionally. So when I say button copy, I'm actually talking about the words on the button, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And finally, when you have forms, you want to keep required fields to a minimum in order to keep your conversion rate as high as possible. There are some more nuances to that, but we'll talk about that in just a second. All right, so the first thing is avoiding high friction language. So high friction language is any language that implies risk or effort. So on the left side of the screen, I have a few phrases that I just whipped up that are higher friction. And on the right, I have some lower friction versions of the same thing. So on the left, we have transform your business. So transform, while that, it sounds like a really nice thing, we're all after some sort of transformation whenever we're buying a product or a service, but it also sounds like a lot of work. Transforming my business sounds like a lot of work. If there's a button below that to do something, I have to pause for a second because, that sounds like a lot of effort. Next, we have learn how to pay less in taxes. So for that first one, transform your business. An alternative could be grow your business. I know that that doesn't necessarily mean the exact same thing, but the point is to avoid these words like transform. And again, you can test these things. You never know. Some things will work in some cases and not in others. But these are things you want to look out for because you might be putting more friction than you mean to in your copy. So the next one is learn how to pay less in taxes. So the word learn is very common in web copy. You see buttons all the time that say like learn more and stuff like that. But again, with learn, you are implying more work, more effort. Learning is something that we think of as, I have to pay attention, I have to think, I have to read. A lower friction version of the same thing would be see how to pay less in taxes. So the word see implies a whole lot less effort and work than learn. And I know that sounds incredibly nitpicky and like, how could that possibly make a difference? But in a second, we're going to talk about button copy, and I'll show you exactly how it makes a difference. So the last thing we have here is register now. So if this were for a webinar or something like that, the word register, again, kind of implies a lot of work. It just sort of conjures up this image of like registering for something. It's a whole ordeal that I have to go through. A lower friction way to say that might be save your seat. So we're going to dive a bit deeper into that now, because we're going to talk about button copy. So once again, button copy, I'm talking about literally the words inside the button that people click on. So sometimes those buttons are to get to other parts of the website, but sometimes that's where your main call to action is, where someone's actually going to fill out your form and send it to you, or they're going to actually make a purchase. So some of the higher friction words are phrases like register, submit, sign up. They're all just a bit, they all just kind of imply effort and work. And there are people who have gone out and tested this stuff on really high volume traffic websites, where they will test the button copy and say, okay, what happens when it says register versus when it says save your seat? And believe me, there is a huge, huge difference. Often, not always, but often there's a huge difference. And that's because one way that you can sort of think of a button is to think of it kind of like a door. So if you are at a party and you decide that you're going to go upstairs and look for the restroom, imagine you go up there and you see a bunch of closed doors and none of them are labeled. Do you feel comfortable or safe opening any of those doors? Probably not, because you don't know what's on the other side. So the same thing happens with button copy. We want to, one, make sure that people know what's on the other side, but two, we want to make sure that what they think is on the other side is not something that is scary or high effort. So register, again, for me at least, it conjures up this whole idea of like, it makes me think of like registering for classes in college, this whole big ordeal. On the other hand, we have things like which could be get my ebook or get my free consultation, see how it works, discover, nothing's coming to mind for me on that one. Reveal my, all right, it's late in the day, I can't think of anything for those two. Maybe earn 2% cash back, something like that, right? So here's a technique for how to figure out what your button copy should be. And it's really simple. So basically what you do is you take this phrase, I want to blank, from your prospect's perspective, and then you fill in the blank with the thing that they want to do that the button helps them do, or that the button actually does. So if your website offers free consultations, you could fill in the blank with, I want to get my free consultation. Or if it's to start a free trial for software, I want to start a free trial. Possibly if it's, for a credit card or something like that, like the example I was just using, like I want to earn 2% cashback rewards. Or very simply, if this is just like a contact form for your services, it might be, I want to get in touch. And then what you do once you filled in the blank is you remove I want to, and whatever's left is your button copy. So then you're left with get in touch, get my free consultation, start a free trial, and so on. And you can totally put your button copy in the first person. You can say, get my free consultation. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, and form fields. You want to keep these to a minimum if you're trying to maximize your conversion rate. So if you want to get as many people to fill out the form as possible, keep your form fields to the smallest number possible. The more fields you have, the fewer conversions you're likely to see. However, you are likely, some teams aren't after more leads, they're after more qualified leads. So adding fields can actually work in their favor by sort of scaring off people who aren't as serious about working with them and keeping only people who are highly motivated. And there's no place where this is more important than with the phone number field. If there's a phone number field in your form, your conversion rate almost certainly will go down compared to if it didn't have the phone number field in there. But again, that might be desirable for some teams. There are a lot of teams out there who don't need more leads, they need better leads, and therefore they want to qualify prospects by putting more fields on there. So that was it. We went through that pretty quickly, so I hope you guys got a few good takeaways from it, but I believe we do have some time for Q&A. So I'll let you take it over, Louisa.
Thank you, Andrew. That was a great presentation. So for anyone that have questions, you can just put it in a chat box. And I want to first clarify that the tips and guidelines you gave today, they do apply to the majority of products and services in all sorts of industries across the board?
Yeah, so there is a bit of a B2B bent towards a lot of the stuff that I talked about, just because that's largely what I am focused on. But the overall principles are the same. So, when we talk about things like being clear, being credible, being different, all of those things apply. The same techniques in terms of, the same points about strategy in terms of staying focused on what your prospects need to hear rather than what you want to say. All of that is equally true in B2C as it is in B2B. And sorry, Louisa, I do want to call it. So on the last slide, I gave a URL to get the slides, and that's actually not correct. You can get onto my mailing list there, but if you want the slides, I actually gave that to Louisa to chat out. I don't know if she...
Yes, I'll put it into the chat right now. And people can just click on this link to get the slides for today.
Excellent.
Just want to make sure the link is, oops, sorry. Yeah, that should be good with the link.
Okay.
Okay. And for the, sorry, go ahead.
Nope, I was just asking if there are other questions, but I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. And for the tips today, the guidelines, they also applies for like websites and landing pages?
Yeah, for the most part. So one of the key differences, so landing pages, there are kind of two different ways that people use the term landing pages. So technically any any page on your website that someone could land on directly is technically a landing page. But typically when someone asks about landing pages, they're talking about something that stands alone from the website. So perhaps something that they're using like in Google Ads or social media ads, where they're directing traffic to a single page. Largely the same principles apply. I would say that a lot of the principles are actually even more important in landing pages. So like we talked about Hick's law, like the idea of limiting the number of choices that people have to make at a given time. If you are paying for traffic to go to a landing page, you want to really limit that, probably just to one thing. Because again, you're paying for those clicks, and there's going to, your campaign's either going to be profitable or not profitable. And you do not want to play any games with giving people, ways to leave the website or other options of what they can do. You really want to focus it as much as you can on, a single choice, sometimes more, but usually just a single choice. But otherwise, the overall principles, again, are the same in terms of like being valuable, being credible, being conversational, and so on.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about, like, in terms of copywriting, what's the format of a great landing page?
What's the format? Yeah, so that's a good question. So it's really tough to to sort of templatize it, because every situation is going to be different, but I can kind of give you like a high level walkthrough of what like the anatomy of a page overall. So I'm not gonna include like the navigation, which are the links at the top of the page, but starting from like where the copy is. The first thing you have is your hero section. So that's typically a headline, a sub headline, and sometimes there'll be an image or a video, maybe like badges, like we talked before, and often a call to action button and so on. I would say that the most important thing for your hero section is to help the people who are landing on it, help them see that they're in the right place. So if people are clicking on links that say, that are talking about dog food, make sure that dog food is in the hero section, right? The idea there is that you want to make sure that whatever people were expecting to see, they are seeing on the page. So to simplify the hero section, you want to make sure that here's just one way to do it, is to make sure that you answer these 4 questions in your hero section. And those 4 questions are: who is this for? What is this? Why do I want it? And what should I do next? So if you answer those 4 questions in your hero section, you're probably doing a pretty good job. Another tip for that is to really try to like match the prospect where they are. So there's a saying in copywriting: enter the conversation that's already happening in your customer's mind or in your prospect's mind. And that's some really useful advice for the hero section as well, as to, if they're going around thinking about a problem that they have, you want to match that problem. If they're going around thinking about a specific desired outcome that they want, you want to lead with that. So that's your hero section. The next thing is to typically, there'll be some sort of proof bar, something that establishes credibility early on. In business to business, that's often like a bunch of logos or something like that of businesses that work with them. In B2C, it might be something else like ratings and reviews and things like that. Then you want to start to get into like how it works. So walking people through, here's how this solution actually accomplishes those, actually solves your pain points or helps you achieve those desired outcomes. And then as you get towards the bottom of the page, where you're going to have your final call to action, where you present your offer, that's where you also want to where you want to really address objections, anxieties, and questions that they have, because now so you've already shown them early on in the page why this matters, what it is, how it works. And now that they're inching closer to actually making a decision, they have a little bit more anxiety. So you want to make sure that you answer the questions that they have, neutralize their objections and anxieties, and so on. So that's roughly kind of the anatomy of a page. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that sometimes, but if you follow that as your overall outline, that should help.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. And I have another question. Like, what are some of the most common mistakes for copywriting that you see people making that we should be avoiding at all costs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So one thing I think that I see a lot, and this isn't necessarily a mistake as much as it is an omission, is that people forget to include like putting the prospect actually on the page, like who is this for, making it super clear that yes, this is for you. That's like one of the questions that people are subconsciously asking themselves when they're evaluating websites is this for people like me? I don't know if we have a lot of marketers on here, but like there's a famous marketer named Seth Godin who talks about this idea a lot, that there's a very powerful force that is within all of us. And that force is people like me do things like this. And that is very much at play when people are evaluating solutions on a website, is like, is this for people like me? Do people like me use this? And that's something that often is omitted on websites and in landing page copy. some other things that people do, we talked earlier about like trying to be clever or cute and putting that over clarity. Other things, another big one is forgetting to end your page with a call to action, or just kind of phoning it in with like a very weak call to action. So people will sometimes just like slap something on. They're like, ready to get your consultation, get it now. And it's like a button and that's it. When really what you want to do is you want to kind of take all of that desire and interest that you've been building up and really channel it into a strong close. In sales, they say like always be closing, right? It's the same thing in marketing and web copy, is to actually like end your pages with a clear direction of this is what you should do next, this is why, and this is why you should feel safe doing it. So that's another one. But yeah, there are a million mistakes that we all make all the time, but those are just a handful that come to mind right now.
That's amazing. Thank you, Andrew. So I think that's about it for tonight, but it was a great presentation. We learned so much from you tonight, Andrew. Thank you for taking out your time to speak to us. But I'm sure there's still a lot more to copywriting that we can learn from you. Yeah. So where can we go to reach out to you or to just learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. So please do go ahead and check out copyspotlight.com. That's where you can get on my mailing list. I send tips, videos, all sorts of things to that list. Once again, this is incorrect. The slides are not there. If you want the slides, please use the Google Docs link that Lisa chatted out separately. I don't want to be an unethical marketer here promising something that isn't there. But if you want to get in touch with me, you can also check out my website, which is just my name, andrewyedlin.com. You can chat with me there. Even if you're not interested in hiring me, you can get my information there and get in touch that way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. And for everyone that joined us tonight, subscribe to our channel and check out Andrew's website and the Google Docs that we have in the chat box. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Thanks. Goodbye.